Hello and welcome to this round 14 of Grand Prix Stockholm, and we have two Pro Tour winners, both on blue-white control, both on 11 and 2, but with slightly different targets that they're aiming to achieve here. Obviously, both of them want to make top 8 of that GP. That much is not unusual to any of the players that entered the room the start of this weekend, but for Luis Salvato, there is a bigger goal in front of him. If he can make it to the quarterfinals of this GP, he ties on points with Seth Manfield to be tied on Player of the Year. That would represent a playoff at some point in the future. If he wins the quarterfinals, he is outright Player of the Year. But in order to get there, at 11 and 2, he needs to almost certainly win this round and then be playing for top 8. If he loses this round at an X3 record, his likelihood of being able to make it in is pretty dicey, and he's got a very, very tough opponent here. Ivan Floch has won a Pro Tour playing control. This is what he likes to do, and he's put up a fantastic record so far this weekend. It is not going to be easy, Simon.
Absolutely not. And, of course, these two players doing very well with their blue-white decks. I'm checking out the deck lists, and actually there are not many differences. Luis has a
How
few
about
more.
Crucible of Worlds?
Yeah, has a few more one-offs, spicy one-offs, and Crucible of Worlds is one of them. He plays that card as a mirror main deck, mirror tech, because the games go so long that sometimes you need your sideboard cards already in game one. And Field of Ruin, Flooded Strand, together with the Crucible of Worlds, that's already a huge advantage for Luis.
Yeah, Ivan Floch did not have an answer for the Crucible Worlds on the play from Luis Salvato. An opt here coming for Ivan Floch. There are some possible answers that can come along at some point in the game. A Detention Sphere could get rid of it for a while. You could potentially try and bounce and counter it. But that Crucible of Worlds being in play means that one of the things that every control deck wants to do, hitting land drops, is going to be much, much easier for Luis on the right-hand side of your screen than for Ivan on the left.
I think Luis can also play a game of just targeting all the non-basic lands of Ivan. It doesn't really matter whether it's Celestial Colonnades or just these Hallowed Fountains, Glacial Fortresses. In the end, Ivan will just sit there with only his basic lands, and that's not too many lands. And we haven't even mentioned Ghost Quarter yet.
Yeah, Ghost Quarter, kind of just a more efficient version of Field of Ruin when you start enacting this sort of plan, less mana investment to get it going. And the cool thing, of course, I guess, is also that Field of Ruin, you can activate it at the end of turn, which means you're holding up all of your mana for counter magic up until that point.
Exactly. So I was looking at a bunch of the other differences. Of course, the counter magic is a bit different. Luis has a Vendilion Click instead of the third Snapcaster Mage. He's playing 4 opts where Ivan only plays 2. But ultimately, the amount of this is probably the biggest difference: the fact that Ivan plays the full 4 Serum Visions. That Luis doesn't have space for with all his one-offs. And then one more Terminus in Luis's deck, but I don't think that's going to be very relevant. An additional copy of Search for Azcanta in Ivan's deck. He's playing 2 instead of 1. But we see the other value permanent already on the battlefield, Crucible of Worlds.
Yeah, already we've seen the first activation of Field of Ruin on a Glacial Fortress. One has to presume that Hallowed Fountain is a bit of a target also. And one of the cool things about this is that we've seen other blue-white mirrors where Game 1 has taken a pretty sizable amount of time. If Luis Salvato can get himself into a winning position without having to burn through too much of the clock, that makes it that much easier for this match to come to a natural conclusion, which is not a foregone conclusion when it comes to this mirror match.
And it's not just land destruction, it's also card advantage every single time he gets a card from his graveyard. So this Crucible is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, a really interesting piece of tech that's being employed by Luis Salvato. Just one of the reasons that there's that little 3 next to his name. 3 meaning that as of right this moment, he's the 3rd ranked player in the world. That could all change in the next few hours, though. If he's able to make the top 8 of this GP, then he is challenging Seth Manfield to become Player of the Year at this very last weekend when there's any opportunity to pick up pro points.
We see exactly what we expected. Field of Ruin being activated every single turn, targeting the non-basic lands of Ivan.
And of course, as and when Luis Salvato draws into Ghost Quarter, another difference that Ghost Quarter has, I believe it can target any land, isn't that correct?
Exactly, and that's the point. Once Ivan is sitting there with the basic lands, then Ghost Quarter is effectively Strip Mine.
And one that can get returned each and every turn. It really creates a very different dynamic than what we're used to seeing in this blue-white control mirror. Often it comes down to Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, being kind of one of the biggest, most important cards in the matchup. But right now, the reprint from Core Set 2019, absolutely gigantic in this matchup. Celestial Colonnade, a card that has a bit of a target on its head when there's Field of Ruin, even at the best of times. And, you know, this is not the best of times for Ivan Floch right now. In days gone by, Celestial Colonnade would have been the main source of damage for these blue-white control decks. Field of Ruin makes that a little bit trickier.
Yeah, but Ivan is playing correctly here. He's just saying, okay, I accept that you have this chain going on, but I'm not going to expose anything to your counter magic, because in the end, yes, you're playing a free land each turn, but as long as nothing happens, you're not really capitalizing on that advantage. There might even be a point where Luis is forced to discard because he can only get one card. Well, he draws one card per turn, and if he doesn't have a land drop from his hand, but instead plays a land from his graveyard, he will actually be forced to discard at some point.
Yeah, and at that point, the amount of advantage that Luis is gaining from the Crucible of Worlds diminishes slightly.
Yeah, and you actually see exactly that. Of course, drawing and discarding is still good as long as you have dead cards in your hand, but it's much better for Ivan than it could have gone.
So Field of Ruin again getting activated. There's a Field of Ruin in play for Ivan Floch as well now. And I'm interested to see how many basics there are in each of these lists. Obviously, we know that Luis Salvato has the potential to do cool things with Crucible of Worlds, but it looks like even Ivan Floch has 7 islands, 2 planes. It's going to be difficult for him to get too badly hurt by this synergy that's going on in Luis Salvato's deck until pretty late in the game.
Yeah, nine basics each, 7 islands, 2 planes for Ivan, and 6 islands, 3 planes for Luis. 2 Hallowed Fountains is the standard number of remaining fetchable lands. So I don't know if Ivan already lost both of his Hallowed Fountains, but Flooded Strand is becoming weaker and weaker as we speak.
Couple of copies of Field of Ruin now for Ivan Floch. Field of Ruin, a less exciting target for opposing Field of Ruins, but now there's a Ghost Quarter.
Now we're talking.
Now, if you're Ivan Floch, currently you're hitting your land drops and things are going okay. What should Ivan be thinking about if he's looking at winning this game in spite of what's going on the other side of the battlefield?
The big question to me is, how is he going to deal with the things that Luis is inevitably going to do? And this is now that Ghost Quarter has appeared, it's actually obvious that Ivan will be forced to be the first to act. You cannot just let Luis destroy all of your lands, clearly. So Ivan needs to craft a hand where he can actually tap 4 mana for a Jace, tap 5 mana for a Teferi, and still come out ahead. And this is going to be extremely difficult. So I think what you want to do is you want to bounce Crucible of Worlds at the end of Luis's turn with Cryptic Command, a play that you already mentioned. But if Luis is smart about that, I think he just lets it resolve and recasts it next turn. And it's so hard to hard counter something when your opponent has 10 mana available.
Now, Luis here, he's not getting aggressive with this Ghost Quarter just yet. I presume that's because he recognizes there's still quite a few basic lands to be fetched.
Yeah, like I said, there are 9 basics in Ivan's deck. You can see 7, the 7th one entering the battlefield now.
These guys much more aggressively using the likes of Field of Ruin on Celestial Colonnade, because that's a land that has a bit more of an immediate impact.
Yeah, and Ivan, of course, not interested in using Field of Ruin at the moment, because it would just enable Luis to get a creature back, get a land back from his graveyard.
Also, it's probably not in Ivan's best interests to fetch up the last of his basics.
Yeah, another reason. Just having this Field of Ruin as as colorless mana sources is fine for him. We might even see Luis go for the Field of Ruins at some point.
Hieroglyphic Illumination now from Luis Salvato. Drawing through his deck quite nicely.
Yeah, not that he really needs extra cards here.
So it looks like Luis Salvato getting a little punchy. So we've been crunching the numbers. We've had Frankie numbers, Dr. Frank Carsten, Hall of Famer and noted mathematician, figuring out the details of the permutations of how things can go in these last couple of rounds. And we're pretty comfortable that it's fair to say it is very unlikely, not 0%, but not a high percentage chance that a 12-3 finish is able to be good enough to make it into the top 8. That being the case, this match virtually an elimination match when it comes to top 8 consideration, and so a lot of pressure on Luis Salvato in this and presumably the next round.
Yep. Vendilion Click sees Ivan's hand here. 4 removal spells, a Snapcaster, Negate, Logic Knot, and Mana Leak. So Luis, perfect information from now on as to what Ivan is working with.
And Luis does have a source of damage now on the battlefield, which is not long to stay there. He's not going to fight over keeping a Vendilion Click around. In some respects, the most important thing that he got was all of that information.
Yeah, and Ivan immediately paths the Vendilion Click so that he stays on 7 cards in hand.
It's going to be a long old game in terms of actually closing things out here. There's a lot of different advantages that Luis Salvato has been able to piece together here. He's gradually reaching a point where his Azcanta the Sunken Ruin may transform, and that does seem like a reasonable target for the Fields of Ruin on Ivan Floch's side of things.
I'm actually a bit surprised that Luis is not attacking those fields. With the Crucible advantage, I think that's it's the best thing that can happen to him.
Okay, so here comes the Detention Sphere, and it's got a couple of juicy targets. It can take out either the Crucible of Worlds or the Search for Azcanta. I would guess that the Crucible of Worlds would be the likely thing that it will deal with, and then we see that that's the case. And Luis just allows that to happen.
It looks like Luis is fine for now with all the value he's already generated. We've seen him be forced to discard a bunch of times, and he can always get back that Crucible later when he really needs it. He can bounce Detention Sphere, play a Field of Ruin from his graveyard, and then either counter or just even let Detention Sphere resolve again. He's the one that makes the rules of this game now.
And I think that we're hitting a point where these players are running out of basics in their deck.
No.
Certainly looking a little bit that way. And yeah, with the extra basics in hand for Luis Salvato, that last search did not provide fruit.
Mm-hmm. Luis also has a basic in his graveyard, which, of course, the Crucible and Search for Azcanta synergize really nicely together.
So here's Jace the Mind Sculptor. This is a card worth fighting over, and there are lots of cards in each of these players' hands, lots of mana with which to get involved in that kind of a fight. Now, if you're a control player, is it kind of an all or nothing thing? If you're going to throw one counter spell at this, you might as well throw 2.
Yeah, if you start fighting for that Jace, you want to go all the way and you want to win the counter war. That's the important part. The worst thing that can happen is that you enter the fight and then your opponent just has the last spell on the stack, which is a Cryptic Command, counter draw, and you are losing the fight, but also giving your opponent that card advantage.
So would it be a reasonable line for Ivan Floch if he had, say, just the one counter spell in hand here to bide his time and maybe try and get more counter spells for something later?
He could, but how is he winning this game? He's very far behind in mana development, and now he doesn't want to face a Jace, obviously.
Tough spot for the Pro Tour champion Ivan Floch here. Jace the Mind Sculptor, one of the most powerful Planeswalkers ever printed. Honestly, it's the sort of thing that until recently, I don't think that there was a huge amount of debate as to the best planeswalker in terms of
You can see that
mana.
that the Escanta actually shouldn't have flipped. Luis flipped it with 6 cards in the graveyard and 1 card in exile.
Yeah, it looks like there's just a judge putting together a little warning on that one. Need to make sure keeping those counts accurate. Each of these guys just double checking through their graveyards, getting a feel for what's left in their deck. And a Logic Knot from Ivan Floch. There are enough cards in Ivan's graveyard, thanks in no small part to Field of Ruin, that he should be able to make this a must-counter Logic Knot, rather than one that can simply be paid for.
Yes, what you can sometimes do is you can make the Logic Knot, in this case for 8 or 9, so that you know if Luis pays, he's tapped out. So you can punish that by countering Jace, untapping, and playing your own. Now, sometimes you want to make absolutely sure that Luis is not paying, but it is an interesting option, especially when you are behind and maybe you want to create an unforced error, so to speak.
Well, it looks like that Logic Knot was successful in dealing with the Jace the Mind Sculptor on this occasion. But there are more Planeswalkers where that one came from. Next up, in the cavalcade of Planeswalkery, we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, one of the challengers to the throne of Best Planeswalker in Modern. Certainly a card that has enabled blue-white control in a substantial fashion. And this is not Luis untapping lands to Teferi's ability. This is him just figuring out the correct lands for him to tap to cast the spell in the first place.
Yeah, we actually don't know if that Flooded Strand can actually get something.
Yeah, I see a couple of copies of Hallowed Fountain, and I believe that we're all out of basics for Luis, so it may be that Flooded Strand is a bit of a decoy at this point.
He might have 1 island left. Oh no, one
He's
island
got one
in the
in
graveyard.
hand.
No, one in the graveyard, 1 in hand. So that's actually it. The Flooded Strand is just a bluff at this point.
So Mana Leak would not quite do it on its own, but it would require Luis to tap out if he was going to pay for it.
Yeah, and this is exactly the kind of line that I described earlier. You play a counter spell that isn't sufficient, but that means if your opponent goes for it and pays, they are risking that they won't have answers anymore for the rest of the turn cycle.
All right, so 2 Planeswalkers dealt with by Ivan Floch. Yes, he had to use a little bit of counter magic to go there, but actually really not that much counter magic when you get right down to it. Plays his next Field of Ruin and just sees another opt here from Luis Salvato.
I have to say, very impressive play by Ivan, who was in a really tough spot with the Crucible, but found lines of, well, not winning lines, but he's in a position from where he can fight, from where he can definitely still do many things with the amount of mana he has available.
Field of Ruin, seeing a good target here in Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. It does get activated here in response, and Timely Reinforcement alongside Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command, the clear pickup here, one of the cards that has the potential to have sort of high velocity in this matchup, I suppose. It does a lot for what it is. And both these guys now thinning their decks down quite a bit when it comes to all of these basics that they've removed thanks to Field of Ruin. It's a question I always find myself asking once we get into these big control mirrors. Is one of the considerations for either of these players going to be decking?
I think yes. You have to be very careful about that.
And it's not, especially in this particular Modern format, something that we see as often as we do in some other formats. It feels to me like between Planeswalker activations and use of the likes of Celestial Colonnade a little easier to close out games than sometimes we might even see in Standard. But
I think Teferi is the main reason that we don't see decking. Both the ultimate, but also the -3 ability make it really difficult for either, well, for the winning player to deck at least.
as things stand here, this is Luis Salvato's second copy of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and it's meeting a negate. Second and last copy of Teferi, if I'm correct.
Yes, both players on 3 Jace to Teferi.
So Cryptic Command in response to negate. Luis Salvato, he's had to use so much more mana than Ivan Floch here.
Yeah, he's picking his fights aggressively, I have to say. I think Ivan, okay, he has a few dead cards, but if he has a Cryptic Command of his own or a Snapcaster Mage, he should be in good shape here.
So another Logic Knot coming along. This is the counterspell with Delve, so pay X more in order to be able to resolve your spell, but that X cost can include cards removed from the graveyard.
Yeah, and I think there are only those 5 lands left for Luis. The battlefield is getting a little bit out of hand here.
Now, the graveyard is still a resource for Ivan Floch, so he's being a little bit careful about how many cards he wants to remove from that graveyard. It both fuels further Logic Knot and is useful for Snapcaster Mage. So Luis Salvato here, he has a Logic Knot of his own.
Yeah, and he can be more aggressive because I think it's the first Logic Knot that he's casting. Ivan Floch is planning to use a lot more of them.
Do we have yet another piece of counter magic? I think that there's a Snapcaster Mage in hand for Ivan Floch here, so this stack only going to get bigger. And a mana leak for the Snapcaster Mage.
Yep, and that's exactly it. Ivan has those 3 removal spells in hand, and I think Luis even knows about them. So Luis gets to resolve Teferi, which is a huge deal here.
Teferi immediately ticking down to get rid of Detention Sphere, meaning that there's going to be a little bit of time with that Crucible of Worlds back in play. And Field of Ruin back once again with the rude behavior. Each of these players now out of basics to fetch, which means that Field of Ruin are able to do a bit of a number on the lands of Ivan Floch. It's something that we prophesied early doors in this game, and we may see that come to fruition soon enough.
Yes, and now I would like to see a Ghost Quarter on a Plains, just so that Ivan is shuffling his library.
It's a great point, because Teferi has put that Detention Sphere back into Ivan Floch's deck, and being able to make it be in a random place where, as compared to comparatively close to the top, a big value add.
You can even wait for the Search for Azcanta trigger, which is even nicer. You let Search for Azcanta resolve the trigger, and then if Ivan flips it, oh no, then he gets the activation, gets the Detention Sphere anyway. So it's actually better this way. Tricky.
But I mean, Search for Azcanta can't pick up Detention Sphere. Can it? I thought it was only instants and sorcery. Is it a non-creature spell?
I'm pretty sure it's non-creature spell. Yeah. Non-creature. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that's how it works.
As things go here, we've got a flurry of copies of Field of Ruin being sort of chained off one another here. Respond with one to the other. I mean, all of a sudden, this is the kind of the familiar territory that we see for Luis Salvato. A couple of Planeswalkers on the field at the same time. Ivan Floch's battlefield looking comparatively sparse now. He's down to just basics in play, and there is Crucible of Worlds, meaning that we are going to see Ghost Quarter coming back and making life only harder for Ivan Floch from here.
Non-creature, non-land.
All right.
That's Azcanta.
You got it. So Teferi ticking up. Jace probably standing pat on 3 loyalty and just using the Brainstorm ability.
Luis not even bothering with the planes, just going for the islands.
Maybe he's just going from right to left.
I thought I thought because Detention Sphere is still the only answer to Crucible, that it would actually make sense to just deal with the planes first. There are so many islands that it seems like you're winning anyway if you've destroyed that many lands.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how many draw steps Ivan Floch is likely to go through here in the face of what Luis Salvato's got going. It's a tough old ask to fight against two planeswalkers.
It's not so much fun. The main deck Crucible winning Luis the control mirror here. Game 1 basically won by a single card.
A single card resolved on turn 3 on the play for Luis Salvato. Yes, it took a further, conservatively, 15 turns or so to actually get converted into a mark in the win column, but 25 minutes left on the clock. Seems ample time for Luis Salvato at least to keep his dreams of a top 8 and a Player of the Year berth alive. Might be a little tougher for Ivan to win 2 games in 25 minutes, though we've already been caught eating a little bit of humble pie when we had Joel Larsen, who already took a draw this round to put himself in very good shape for top 8, was playing Luis. Joel Larsen responsible for one of Luis's only losses, including a win in about 6 minutes in the final game of their set earlier on today.
Yeah, that was really nice. And you can see both players now removing a lot of their creature removal, but not all of it, because they know that Vendilion Clicks, Spell Quellers, Snapcaster Mages are still very relevant in the sideboarded games. In the past, it was actually the case that Celestial Colonnade was the deciding factor often, but now that Field of Ruin is everywhere, it's almost impossible to win the mirror match with Celestial Colonnade. It's still a very good land in other matchups, but not as good in the control mirror anymore.
I mean, Field of Ruin, a card that in principle can get played by large swathes of the format. It's not too unusual to be able to get away with having a couple of colorless utility lands, even in a 3-color deck in this format. But the blue-white control list, it also has the time to be able to deploy it. I mean, if you're talking about a deck like the Dredgevine deck, for example, or Bridgevine rather, it's so focused on doing what it's doing in a very short number of turns that something like Field of Ruin, there's not time in the game for.
And you never want it in your opening hand, because it doesn't cast the super important 1 and 2 drops that you have to resolve with these kind of decks. Humans would never play Field of Ruins. It's just not that many decks in the format can happily play 3 or 4 Field of Ruin.
So these guys drawing their opening 7s. Ivan, he's been here before. He has played, I would suggest, more control than any other constructed archetype.
Yeah, I would think so, especially in minutes of lifetime measured.
All right, Search for Azcanta on turn 2 here for Ivan Floch. He's able to get the key enchantment down early, and it looks like it's, in that regard, a little bit of a mirror that we have on our hands here. Each of these guys hitting their land drops nice and neatly. And the Search for Azcanta, if one person has it and the other doesn't, it can represent a pretty sizable advantage. But when both players have them, all it does is kind of gets you to the mid-game a little faster. I was interested to see Cryptic Command being thrown away there by Luis Salvato off his Search for Azcanta. Yeah. That seems like a premium card in this matchup to me.
The most important cards in the matchup are lands, so you want to make sure that you hit your land drops. Just as I say that, a plains enters the graveyard. But also, especially after sideboarding, Cryptic Command loses a lot of its appeal, because Dispel is a 1-mana answer to your triple blue and 1 colorless card.
You can see a Surgical Extraction now in Luis Salvato's list after sideboarding. That one potentially a nice answer to something that he's been able to either counter or that has been put in the graveyard by a Search for Azcanta.
You can also use it in response to Snapcaster Mage. So there are a lot of ways to utilize that card. Still a bit surprised though by declining the plains. because Luis is not looking at a land-heavy hand.
Yeah, right now living off the top of his deck in terms of finding a 6th land here. And it seems funny to be talking about the importance of the 6th, 8th, 10th land in a deck that has a curve that stops at 5, but where this blue-white control deck really ends up shining, especially in the mirror, is being able to play lots of spells in a single turn.
But there's another thing going on here, which is once you pass the turn without playing a land, your opponent is getting a huge advantage because you are soon about to discard, and your opponent is further continuing their development. So you can see how lucky Luis was finding a land there.
Ivan Floch, he's got a bit of a decision on his hands here in terms of whether he wants to be drawing the cards he sees. Something important enough that he was willing to miss a land drop. All right, Snapcaster Mage coming down now. A Snapcaster Opt by the looks of things.
No, I love the low-value Snapcaster Mage in this matchup because you don't invest so much mana that you run into counter magic. It's all flash speed, so no Planeswalkers coming down for the opponent. Really, really nice little package there. Even forcing a response.
And Path to Exile on a Snapcaster Mage. I don't know how much Ivan Floch's even going to mind that, because as we've previously noted, getting lands into play, one of the important things, at least in the early to mid stage of this control mirror. Path to Exile, kind of an omnipresent removal spell in this modern format. Interesting new removal spell, potentially going to shake things up a little bit in modern with the release of Guilds of Ravnica, though likely not going to be added to blue-white control.
No, but I think to many other decks. I fully expect Assassin's Trophy to be a modern staple.
And yeah, Reed Duke showing up with Abzan this weekend, I'm sure would have loved to have had access to that powerful instant speed removal spell.
Maybe a few weeks too early. You have to wait until the card is printed, released, and legal in the format.
The first opportunity we'll get to see cards from Guilds of Ravnica being played. If you're interested, obviously get to your pre-release at the end of the month, but the team series at the World Championship will feature Guilds of Ravnica, and those teams, they're going to get to see the new cards in their entirety on Wednesday, as will we all. It's going to be an exciting time.
There we see it. And you have this, I want to say almost classical Search for Azcanta play. You flip it, you pass the turn, your opponent Field of Ruins, and you get to get one activation out of the deal.
And if that one activation finds you a Cryptic Command, it could be a lot worse. These other ones get shuffled in effectively because Field of Ruin, amongst other things, forces you to shuffle your deck as you're searching up that basic land.
Yeah, and Luis knew that this would happen. The Field of Ruin was there visible. So he needed to make sure that he's not exposing himself too badly to something that Ivan can play during his turn.
So a Surgical Extraction being played here. Obviously, we can't hear the announcement of targets, but we'll find out soon enough which card in the graveyard is the one that's potentially going to be got rid of here.
My guess is Field of Ruin.
Yeah, I mean, you can target anything but a basic land, and Field of Ruin, far from basic. I think I like this. You also get all that information as to what's going on in your opponent's hand.
Yeah.
All of the information about how they've sideboarded. Yeah, we see here Luis Salvato. This is one of the things that you can always do anytime you've got a search effect that lets you look through your opponent's deck. Even once you've found the cards that you are looking for, you have a little bit of time. It's not as if you can spend all day writing out their deck list carefully and sorting their deck or what have you. But you can get a good old look at what's going on, and that information, it's kind of all part of what this spell's all about.
Yeah. You know the sideboard plan, you know the current hand, and you get the effect of Surgical Extraction, which in this case means no more Field of Ruins for Ivan Floch. And now Luis will have a checklist of the cards in Ivan's hand, and we should try to keep those in mind as well, because in game one he was very good about deciphering the contents of Ivan's hand. He had gotten one glimpse of it with the Vendilion Clique, and then afterwards he played around everything that Ivan could have, but not more. So he knew about the 3 removal spells, didn't respect the counter when Ivan was down to 3 cards.
So a few interesting cards that in that hand. The 2 Path to Exiles, obviously not at their best. Jace the Mind Sculptor, very exciting indeed. Then we had Negate, Mana Leak, and I think that there was one more piece of counter magic in there.
Yeah, Disdainful Stroke.
That's the one. Important against the Planeswalkers, but not so much against the smaller pieces of counter magic. So a Cryptic Command here on Search for Azcanta. Luis Salvato's shown himself consistently to be willing to use these Cryptic Commands in unusual spots. He doesn't need for them to always be a counter spell. If
you've seen Shota Yasuoka play, he's willing to just, at the end of turn 4, bounce your land, draw a card.
Interesting.
That's how low of a chance Cryptic Command has of resolving. So you're actually happy here if Ivan goes into some kind of fight, not because your Cryptic Command gets countered, but because you suddenly have a 8 to 5 mana advantage, and then suddenly that Jace or Teferi are threatening to resolve once again. This spell, I think, is the key card in those mirror matches.
So there's both Jace and Teferi in hand here for Luis Salvato. He has some counter magic to protect them, but not an inexhaustible supply.
So Mana Leak and Disdainful Stroke are gone, which means that the known cards from Luis's side in Ivan's hand are Negate, Jace, and 2 Path to Exile. Only one counter remaining that Luis knows of.
And of course, he has a negate for that negate. So this Jace appears to have a fairly good chance of resolving. 13 minutes left on this clock. Luis Salvato currently up a game.
And it's super interesting. Ivan actually has a Snapcaster Mage. That's one of the cards that Luis doesn't know about. But he has 1 mana. He's missing 1 mana, exactly 1 mana to actually go for counter Snapcaster counter.
So he uses a Disdainful Stroke here. That gets negated. And that means that Jace does resolve. 3 loyalty, immediate use of the Brainstorm ability. And one of the things that makes Jace so powerful is that even the first Brainstorm is, those small edges getting you a little bit ahead here. And if he's able to keep that Planeswalker in play for more than a turn or 2, then this could be gigantic. He's still got Dispel in hand if he needs.
I think Ivan might just attack with the Colonnade. If he doesn't have a powerful play of his own, well, he has his own Jace, right? So that is a powerful play. Then that way you don't expose yourself to Path. But if he didn't have the Jace himself, I think it would not be completely unreasonable to just go for an attack with a Colonnade. This is the one time where there's no Ghost Quarter, no Field of Ruin, and you're only bad against Path with that line.
An attack for 2 here on Jace the Mind Sculptor. Not going to be enough to kill the Planeswalker off, but slightly limiting its options. And Disdainful... Sorry, it is a Disdainful Stroke on Jace coming from Luis Salvato. Negate meets a Dispel. Is there any more for Ivan Floch here? If there's not, then he could be in all sorts of trouble.
We know that there are 2 Path to Exiles in his hand, so those are not going to counter anything. What is his final card? Is it Cryptic Command?
It looks like it is a Cryptic Command. Just a little bit of a Hollywood performance there for us. Waiting a little bit before throwing down the counter magic. The sort of the extra cost, I suppose, in him playing this Cryptic Command here is that on the other side of things, Luis Salvato, if he's been keeping good book on what's going on in Ivan Floch's hand, now knows the exact contents of his opponent's hands, and that's not worth nothing.
He knows it just until now, because now Brainstorm will hide a lot of that information again. Heads up play by Ivan here. Cryptic Command, counter bounce your colonnade, protecting the Jace, because he wasn't sure that he would have the mana for the path, and he wouldn't be sure that the path actually resolves against Luis with a bunch of mana open.
We've been talking about small edges, and these guys, they know where to look for them. Jace the Mind Sculptor, 4 abilities. The bottom one we never tend to see actually used, but you know what? There are plenty of occasions where you see +2, +2, +2, and it's kind of assumed that at some point the game would end based on it.
Another beautiful control mirror here, and once again, I'm getting a bit concerned about the round time, the clock becoming an issue.
Yeah, if you're Luis Salvato here at 1-0 up, it's difficult to imagine losing this game and another one in 9 minutes. Still possible for him to lose this game, though.
Absolutely, and I think Ivan is ahead here slightly. He has Azcanta, Jace, and a creature to attack with. He also has a colonnade that's ready to go for it, should it ever come to that. But this game is clearly not decided. It's just if Ivan wins, I don't expect a third game to finish.
And you see there wasn't even a need to wait about Counter Magic. Only a single planes available for Ivan Floch. And these guys respect each other to kind of know that there's not going to be any Pact of Negations lying around in either of these guys' lists. So Salvato, he's got Planeswalkers in play. He's got lands available to him. But this game not all over just yet.
One thing that's really, really interesting is how much of an advantage Luis is getting from the fact that he knew generally more about what Ivan was working with. So for Ivan, he has to figure out, basically with his intuition and with every turn that goes by, what could Luis be holding? What is going on here? Does he have a Supreme Verdict and 2 Path to Exiles, or is he just sitting there with Cryptic Command and Dispel, which of course makes a huge difference.
Serum Vision setting up a Teferi on the top of the deck for Ivan Floch for future turns. For now, though, it's going to be some good old-fashioned Tiago Chan on Tiago Chan combat here, potentially, as Snapcaster Mage attacks Jace the Mind Sculptor. A Snapcaster Mage flashed in by Luis Salvato here.
And that's good enough to consider going for a counter war here, because it is a value Snapcaster Mage that, if it resolves, can also target a counter magic or Cryptic Command from the graveyard. I don't know how much mana Luis has available, but yeah, I think we've entered a stage of the game where you're actually happy to go into a counter war here.
Cryptic Command meets a Negate, which in turn meets a Dispel.
Like I said, Dispel absolutely key, because you protect your main phase plays or your Cryptic Commands from resolving.
So on top of everything there, that Snapcaster Mage successfully killing off Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yep, that was huge. And now look at Ivan's position. He has 5 mana untapped, so Search for Azcanta activation is ready, but also we knew that he had at least, we knew about 2 paths left in his hand. He's not going to have shuffled away all of them with the Colonnade on Luis's side of the table.
In future turns, we know that there's the potential for another Teferi, though. Search for Azcanta in response to Field of Ruin. Sorry, Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, I suppose, in response to Field of Ruin here. Oh, wow, an embarrassment of riches on the top of Ivan Floch's deck here. He had the option at Teferi, but he's also got the option at Cryptic Command, so he takes that one.
Yeah. If he gets a Plains here, he's actually representing double path. This way he's only representing a single path to exile. If you're Luis and you have a piece of counter magic here, once again, just animating the Colonnade and attacking Jace, trying to go for it, is not out of the question. Don't think he does, though.
Teferi ticking up. A couple of lands available on Salvato's side of the battlefield to untap already. And we mustn't forget, of course, that the Celestial Colonnades on Salvato's side of the battlefield, that a little bit safer thanks to an early surgical extraction on Field of Ruin.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't find a dispel or negate, because otherwise I'm pretty sure that we would have seen, we might see the attack anyway. Why not?
Path to Exile does look like it's going to be getting rid of this particular Celestial Colonnade. And I think that Luis here fast approaching the point where he's running out of basics now. Let's see how many basics are left in Ivan Floch's deck, though. Can't be that many. 4 minutes left on the clock. For Ivan Floch here, the best that he can reasonably hope for has to be a draw.
Interesting that Luis goes for the Path to Exile on Snapcaster Mage, but it makes sense because the Celestial Colonnade plus Snapcaster Mage are guaranteed to take down Teferi. So if Luis allows Ivan to untap, Ivan has a very high incentive to protect his Snapcaster Mage from Path, or to protect the Celestial Colonnade from Path. But now I think that's probably the nail in the coffin. You don't beat those two Planeswalkers. However, because of the round time situation and of course the position these two players are in the tournament, there's no need to concede this game if you are sure that you're not going to have time for a third game. You can just basically see if Ivan actually gets a win assembled here with what would be most likely Jace Ultimate. Attacking with Colonnades seems, like I said, attacking with Colonnades till your opponent is dead is very unlikely, especially because Luis still has those Field of Ruins in his deck.
Yeah, I mean, Path to Exiles on successive Celestial Colonnades that Luis Salvatos have tried to attack these Planeswalkers with, but yeah, if you're Ivan Floch here, you've got a little under 3 minutes and 17 damage to deal. This seems like a big ask.
Bit of confusion there.
Any confusion at this point is not Ivan Floch's friend.
Well, most confusion involves a judge call, so you'll see what comes out of that. Maybe the players missed something.
Just double checking the number of lands played by these guys. These guys sort of, they've got a lot of different things on their mind here, and they're just trying to make sure that it doesn't work out, that there's been any impropriety, any misplays. You can see a burgeoning crowd around our featured match area. Unsurprising given the stage in the tournament and the stakes for some of these players as we get into these final rounds before we hit our top 8. The players just patiently waiting to hear the results of just a little bit of review going on here. Andrei Stradsky coming down just to see what's going on over here. And I've got a wild Rich Hagen has entered the booth. Rich, what do we have with us here?
Hello. Well, not a huge lot of update. Really just wanted to say, thanks to people for paying attention and just working out, that's what we're for. Want to make sure things get stopped. So, we understood there was a suggestion that a couple of turns back, Luis had played a Field of Ruin, had activated Field of Ruin, and then subsequently had laid a second land that turn. So we messaged down to the feature match area, and they've held the players, so judges are now talking about it, trying to work out, is that what we think happened? And then once they've established whether that is indeed what happened, what happens next? So that's where we are, and I'll give you more when we've got more.
Lovely stuff. Thank you very much. And of course, at the moment, it looks like Ivan Floch is just conferring with a judge. Luis Salvato just sort of surveying the scene there. We get a chance to survey the other action going on in our feature match area, because while this is probably the most high-profile match of the various ones in the feature match area, it's not as if you can have a top 8 based on just a single match. We already know, for example, that Joel Larsen, he took a draw with his opponent in that last round, and that means that he is likely in very good shape to be in top 8 at the end of this event. Should be able to find himself a draw somewhere in the room in the final round, one would assume. And we can see now we've got a burgundy shirt in the feature match area, which is one of our head judge staff for this GP. When you've got events this big, sometimes you have a few people in the burgundy shirts just to make sure that appeals go good and easy, and you can handle all of the judge calls that happen when you have thousands of people all in the same room playing a match at the same time.
And it's also a tricky situation, because apparently we are talking about I think we're talking about the surgical extraction turn. So that is a long time ago.
Yes. Yeah, this is a lot of information for these players to pass when really they were trying to think about the end game, what they were doing in the next subsequent stage of the game. You can see that there's currently 0 minutes listed on our clock. We will update that because obviously this kind of a judge stoppage generates with it a little bit of extra time. These players are certainly not at time right now.
Yeah.
Once we have that, we'll update it on our clock for you. They're just trying to figure out exactly how long the stoppage was. But Vendilion clicks on both sides of things here now as play has resumed. These guys trying to figure out a way to end this game out, and a Vendilion click from Salvato, meaning that a cryptic command going to the bottom, that a high delta in terms of the quality on Ivan Floch's hand here.
Yeah, and the fact that Ivan took the supreme verdict out of Luis's hand shows you that he's really playing with the clock in mind. He wants to win this game to get the draw, and in any other spot you would never take a supreme verdict out of your opponent's hand.
Yeah, a little bit less than 2 minutes left on this game. They have restarted things. Not quite sure what the hold-up is here in terms of the resolution of that path to exile. I think maybe... okay, there has actually been a warning for a game rule violation on that one. I think just in terms of unnecessarily slow play, potentially. We can get some details on that.
This was
for the original land issue. Teferi coming down from Salvato, and a Snapcaster Mage with Cryptic Command. That seems like a great pickup here for Ivan Floch, not only because it deals with Teferi, but also because it means there's a few extra points of power on this battlefield for Ivan Floch.
Yep.
He's got Vendilion Click, he's got Snapcaster Mage. Search for Azcanta will transform into Azcanta the Sunken Ruin here.
He's going to attack for 9 this turn. Luis is on 1 before extra turns have even started.
This could be an inauspicious end here for Luis Salvato. At the point that we came into this round, we were thinking about the import of a win or a loss, how you would do on X and 3. On X, 2 and 1, it creates a whole different set of calculations.
I'm pretty certain that both of these players will be playing for the top 8 next round.
Wow.
Not guaranteed, of course, but very, very good chances at a top 8 within what would it be, 12-2-1 record.
And Luis Salvato, he's essentially lived in our feature match area for much of this tournament. You know that we're going to have him on camera or close to it if it works out that we can get things going here. And 3, 2, 1 second left on the clock. I don't think that either of these players can realistically expect to win a game starting in extra turn. So this is ultimately coming to an unintentional draw there. Not necessarily an unusual circumstance for these blue-white mirrors in general, but all credit to Ivan Floch, because I would say that with 5-10 minutes left on the round, it looked like a bit of a sticky wicket for him in terms of finding a way of even getting to the draw there.
Yeah, but there are enough creatures in these decks even after sideboarding. No answer to Celestial Colonnade was also important, and then attacking for 9 when your opponent is on 10. You do get to close out these games relatively quickly.
Well, you know what that means. That is the end of our live matches, at least for this round. If you're Seth Manfield, if you're Luis Salvato, every reason for the next round to be a pretty high-impact one. I'm sure that Seth will be watching. I hope that you guys will stay watching too, and we'll have more Magic after these messages. Hello and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Stockholm. I'm Tim Willoughby here with Pro Tour champion Simon Gertsen, and we don't have so much of a time walk, maybe just sort of a brief time stroll, if you will, before we get on to our next match. We're going to get a chance to see Elias Clocker on Mono White Martyr here against Stephen Madden on Bridgevine. Both of these decks have the potential to do some pretty explosive things, and a turn 1 Serra Ascendant from Clocker, in principle, if you have the sort of Martyr of Sands gain lots of life on turn 2 plan, could end up just doing it all here.
Absolutely. Good starts for both players. Getting to discard Vengevine, of course, one of the key parts of Stephen Madden's game plan, but he doesn't really have the super explosive draw that you can have with hangerback walkers or walking ballistas for 0.
What do we got here? It is a Martyr of Sands. That is 4 white cards in Elias Clocker's hand. He's happy to reveal Ranger of Eos, Cameo of False Hope, Path to Exile, and another Serra Ascendant, because that gains him 12 life. And at 32 life, that means that Serra Ascendant is a 6/6 flying lifelinker. I understand that Bridgevine can have some insane starts, but can it beat this kind of an insane start? I mean, essentially, Bridgevine is probably going to have to deal more than 40 damage if it's going to win this game 1.
There's also another Serra Ascendant coming down and a Path to Exile for Elias next turn. This is why you play Martyr of Sands. And I was actually wondering, who is the person with 3 buys that decided to bring Martyr of Sands to this event? It is Elias Clocker, Gold Pro from Austria.
I mean, at 11-2, he could potentially find himself in the top 8 of this event, and that would be very exciting indeed. Very happy to see a different archetype represented in the final stages of this tournament. Serra Ascendant coming in here. The life totals 38-14 at the end of turn 2. All right, Stephen Mann, it's time for you to fight back here. Starts things off with a Stitcher Supplier. So not really too much help in terms of what went into the graveyard here. A land will mean that Bloodghast gets to come back into play. That Bloodghast so far away from having haste that it's barely even got being stationary going for it.
What Madden wanted to see there was a Gravecrawler. Then he could have cast Gravecrawler, gotten back Vengevine, and maybe started a bit of an attack.
Yeah, as things stand here, he's developed his board to a small extent, but his board looks, frankly, a little foolish against the Serra Ascendant that's soon to be joined by one of its brother monks, all of which have flying, all of which have lifelink, all of which are absolutely colossal.
And then Madden can't even take 2 damage from his Shock Land because otherwise he's dead on turn 4.
Just crazy stuff here. And there's a Cameo False Hope from Elias Clocker to potentially come down here, which not only is it a creature that can fog a big attack that's come from maybe a Goblin Bushwhacker turn, it's also a creature that can sacrifice itself to remove a copy of Bridge from Below. This seems like a very lopsided matchup indeed.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, this mono-white Martyr list of Elias, who is playing a very creature-centric version, making Ranger of Eos just an absolute premium card.
So Stitcher Supply getting sacrificed there, meaning there's another copy of Vengevine in the graveyard. That Greater Gargadon ticking down a little bit thanks to the sacrifice. I mean, in principle, there could be... I mean, there's another Vengevine in hand. There are sequences here that end up with lots of Vengevines all coming into play and attacking this turn. But Elias Clocker, number 1, he's on 44 life. Number 2, he's got that Cameo of False Hope that means that he can just fog the attack if he needs to. And that, the end of game 1, in just incredibly quick fashion.
Yeah.
Huge play from Elias Clocker, and we've heard from our producer's booth that ultimately, because the main match took obviously so long, we don't have time to bring you the whole of that match, but it was, believe it or not, who'd have thunk it, Elias Clocker that was able to take that one down. We will have more Magic for you with our final round of the Swiss. Do not go anywhere. More Magic after these messages.